Right. Okay. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll make a start anyway. So my name's Kim Jamson and I work in the Equality and Training team. And these webinars are part of the training committee's ongoing caseworker training. So if you attend this today, we will tick off your membership records and you will this will count towards your accreditation as a caseworker. It is recorded, so we'll share the registration links with caseworkers after for those unable to attend. But I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Cull from the education team, who's going to talk to you today about online searches that employers might carry out when our members apply for jobs and what really they can and can't do and what things as caseworkers we should be looking out for. Sarah has already delivered this session a number of times, and every single time we have been asked if she can present it again. So we're reaching as many caseworkers and members as we possibly can because we feel that this is a topic that is actually rarely discussed and nobody seems to be really interested in. But I think for teachers is a really, really important aspect. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Kim. And just so you know, the weather here in Birmingham today is cold and grey. It's very, very upsetting on the school run this morning when I had to put my hat back on after having some nice weather. Right, let's open up and get started. So thank you everyone for coming to listen to this session. So as Kim's already mentioned, we're going to talk about online searches of shortlisted candidates, and in particular how this plays into our equalities work and the equalities agenda more broadly. So my name's Sarah. I work in the union's education team, and I am responsible for a number of policy areas, one of which is behaviour. I also look after attendance, pupil and teacher wellbeing and mental health, and safeguarding. And this is a very specific area of safeguarding that that we've uncovered over the past few years that we've been working on this particular policy area. So I've picked out a quote here, which was a serving teacher, and this person had been onto a Facebook group and posted this post. I won't read it all out, but I'll just kind of unpick the sentiment of it. So this teacher had started a new role, and they'd been asked for a social media check. And at first they thought they were just giving permission for a public check, so what's publicly available online. But it was actually a third party that they were handing over their details to. And this third party was even asking for passwords. Now, understandably, this person was concerned, and they'd gone on to this forum to ask for advice and guidance on what they should do about this. And the reason I'm starting with this quote is because it's demonstrating the lack of certainty that's out there for our members, for teachers, about this practice. So once we get started with the detail, we can unpick that and see how we've ended up in the situation that that person found themselves in. So a background to online searches. So everybody working in schools will know about the Keeping Children Safe in Education statutory guidance. It's guidance issued by the DfE that is reviewed regularly and frequently updated to make sure that it's robust and fit for purpose. Back in 2022, an additional point was added into the section on keeping children safe in education that looks at safer recruitment. And the section identified that online searches could be conducted on shortlisted candidates. And this was a surprise to us. And so we challenged this in the consultation on the draft guidance. And the reason that we challenged it is because we were concerned that putting in a very light touch statement recommending that schools carry out online searches of their potential employees, their potential teaching staff, but yet there's no context or guidance for schools. This was very worrying about how this practice might flourish and what this might mean for teachers without any governance. And while the DfE recognised our concerns and they identified that we'd fed back on this in the consultation process. Ultimately, it was ignored. So the 2022 Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance was indeed published with a new inclusion, and this is the inclusion. So as part of the shortlisting process, schools and colleges should consider carrying out an online search as part of the due diligence of shortlisted candidates. This may help identify any incidences or issues that have happened and are publicly available online. And the school or college can then explore these with the applicant at interview. So that was the entirety of the inclusion, which goes back to my original point about how something that is such an invasive and potentially risky process and practice has very little detail on how it can be done ethically and morally and legally as well. So we were worried about this, and we knew that we needed to keep an eye on this as part of our work in the policy team. And sure enough, we started to hear concerns at grassroots levels. So we heard from our national executive members and also activists that there were a growing number of schools who were adding this element of safer recruitment into their policies, but they were very open-ended and were very vague, and really they were leaving them vulnerable to legal challenge. But I think what was equally concerning, perhaps even more so concerning, was that there were numbers of schools who were just going ahead and carrying out these searches. They didn't have anything in their policy, and they certainly didn't have anything within their documentation or their guidance that demonstrated how these searches were going to be conducted appropriately. So it's really worrying to think that this was such an ungoverned and unchecked practice. Then we continued with our work on this to make sure that we understood the picture of it. And through some of the discussions that we had and representations that we made, we became aware that software companies were actively targeting school leaders. So what it seemed had happened is that third-party suppliers, software companies, had spotted this gap, this opportunity to essentially target schools and offer to fulfill this role for them. And because it was under the guise of a school fulfilling its safeguarding responsibilities, they were using that as a way to draw schools in and try and sell their services. But yet the software that they were offering was really very intrusive, and it's searching private social media accounts. But yet there is no one checking this oversight of the process. And also, there's no way of knowing that discrepancies don't exist in the process. So if a school uses a third party, hands over the information that they want to be searched, gets the searches back, and then interprets that how they want, and then appoints or doesn't appoint a person. Well, if they then, the next time they come on a recruitment drive, they've got a position to fill, and they're no longer happy with the first company because another company comes along and they're cheaper, or they're faster to return the results, for example. So they go with those. How is that an equal process? How do they know that how the search was conducted in the first instance is the same as the second instance? So it's really creating an uneven playing field. It's not equitable at all, but yet there's nothing in any DFE guidance to suggest that that's wrong. So it's worrying. So to understand what we think as a union should be in this guidance, if the DFE are going to recommend that schools should carry out online searches of shortlisted candidates, we think that it needs to be done ethically and legally, and certainly in accordance with the obligations that a school or a setting has under the Equality Act and also the Public Sector Equality Duty. And this would be elements such as what is searched for, how is it searched for? So is it searched across different platforms? Is it the person's name or the person's name and the location searched for? Who's going to carry out the searches? The ideal would be that it's the same person every time. so that the search is being carried out consistently, because the person will carry it out in the same way each time. And then how is that information used? So what criteria is being placed on that information to determine whether it is a potential safeguarding risk? And of course, with issues like this, it's really important that we understand that balance. So as a union, we are not denying the importance of safe recruitment checks and safeguarding as a whole. That's of course crucial, and education establishments have a duty to fulfill that. And we've all sadly seen cases where things have gone wrong. So it's not about suggesting or thinking that safeguarding should not be at the heart of the education system. Of course it should, but it has to be proportionate, equitable, fair, and consistent. And we truly believe that both can coexist. It doesn't have to just be one or the other. There's also, despite our own research and representations through the Department of Education, no one's been able to provide any evidence to back up the assertion that online searches will deliver safer recruitment. We haven't found any justification for this, which again, we would expect, given that this is such an intrusive process. We would want to know what the rationale is for it, and we're yet to be given anything that helps us to understand that. So as a union, we've taken some steps to try and address this. Now, having gone back to the Department of Education several times and asked for additional information around this to govern this and provide a framework, and not got anywhere, we've published our own framework. And this is a live piece of advice that we continually review and update, because new information and developments are occurring quite frequently on this topic. So when the framework was first published, there was no reason to believe that third-party companies were getting involved in this process. That only came up in our research and discussions with people after we'd published the initial framework. So once we realised that that was happening, we were able to add in information on the risks of doing that. And then there's other things as well that we've learned as well about data protection, which I'll come on to talk about shortly. And we've made sure that this framework has been shared with members throughout our communications channels, and we've done that regularly so that people know it's there and we're drawing attention to it. So as I've already mentioned, we have had meetings with the DfE on this. We've had several meetings, particularly with the officials responsible for Casey, keeping children safe in education. And while those meetings seemed to make progress, and they said they understood our concerns, we just never got any further, and then engagement completely stopped, and we just stopped getting a response. We engaged with the Secretary of State, the previous Secretary of State before the Labour government were voted in. And while we always got correspondence back, nothing was ever helpful, and there was a complete unwillingness to address our concerns. It was always just ignored, and we were essentially told that we were wrong and there was no reason to be concerned about this. So we then took the issue to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, because they have a duty to prevent discrimination, and we are concerned that this is a practice that can enable discrimination. We secured a meeting to discuss our concerns, and they were very positive and empathetic to this issue, and they understood our concerns over it. They gave us some direction and advice, but ultimately they didn't take the complaint forward. So they gave us some advice around the kind of equalities legislation and also the human rights risks of this, which we have then been able to use in our representations. But as for the EHRC, we just didn't make any progress with them, which was disappointing. And as we continued on this journey in trying to get this addressed, get this looked at, get our concerns taken seriously, we became aware of a growing body of evidence that not only were candidates having their public information searched without any framework on what was being searched, how it should be searched for, what people were looking for, candidates were being asked to actually hand over their social media logins and passwords. Now, anybody who has a social media account will know that this allows access to private and personal data. And this is where it really crosses into the equalities issue, because protected characteristics, depending on what you post on social media, they might not be clear from what you post. But yet, if someone can get into your account, they can see your registration details, they can see your private messages. So they would be able to build up a real picture of protected characteristics. But yet you can't ask for these in a job application under the Equality Act. But somehow this inclusion in keeping children safe in education has opened up this ability, and almost endorsed ability, for schools to start digging into who you are and finding out aspects about you that they shouldn't know. So here are just some of the things that you could learn about someone online. Now, these are specifically under the Equality Act 2010. So we all know about the different protected characteristics, so age, disability, race, religion, or belief. So just to give a few examples. So I don't necessarily post my age online, but if someone went into my social media accounts, they would be able to see that a few years ago, myself and my cohort from school, we all turned 40. So there were lots of messages going around about 40th birthday, remember when you were 40, things like that. So they'd be able to tell, they'd be able to get my age from my messages, whereas I've never publicly posted on social media, oh, I turned 40 today. So yeah, that's one example of how you could learn a protected characteristic about someone. Likewise with marriage. So again, I don't believe I've ever really posted something about being married, but you could find that out from either my messages or my registration details or anything. So there's a lot here that someone could really build up a picture and start to make assertions about you based on information that they really shouldn't have access to. And this is where it really is a growing issue. So there is no clear criteria governing any kind of framework. So this means that there's no way to ensure that schools are not inadvertently or deliberately penalising candidates unfairly. So it's completely based on a set of indistinct standards of what is and is not acceptable in someone's online presence, all with an awareness of information that could be discovered online, but yet you wouldn't otherwise know about. And while the protected characteristics are one really important element of it, there's a lot of other things that you could determine about someone online. So again, for people in the room who don't know me, they wouldn't know that I have a child. But if you went into my personal social media accounts and actually got into my messages or looked around, you would find out that I have a child. And you would also be able to look at things like the accounts that I engage with. So you'd be able to build up a picture of how old she was. So I've got a young child, the fact that she's SEN. And all of these start to build up a picture of someone where you might make a determination about that person. So I might not be seen as a very appealing candidate for a job because I have a young child who has additional needs. Now, suddenly, I probably don't seem like a very attractive candidate to come and work at a school. But yet that's not true at all. No one knows what support networks you have and everything. So it's all about, being able to make judgments on someone, and no one's checking on how those judgments are made. So it's really worrying. So we could tell that this was a really emerging issue, and we were very concerned about it, but we didn't have a kind of quantitative level for it. So we used our member newsletter to gauge the level, the extent of this. And we asked specifically if members had been asked to provide their social media login details to existing or prospective employers. So we had 800 responses, and 12.7% said yes, they had been asked to provide their login details. So on one hand, you could look at this and think, well, that's not really a huge proportion of our membership. So 800 responded, 12.7. But even then, you're still looking at, I don't know, somewhere in the region of about 80 people, maybe 80 or 90 people who are saying that they have. And even if you, and another way of looking at it is if you took 12.7% of all of our membership, that's a really high number. But my pushback on whichever way you look at this is that no one should be being asked for their social media login details. That's not okay. So one person is one person too many, especially when, let's go back to the inclusion in keeping children safe in education. And I've highlighted a part here that says that it needs to be about what's publicly available online. Digging into someone's private messages or personal information that is password protected is absolutely not publicly available online. And the reason that this has flourished and continued to happen is because there is no governance or framework on this. There is nothing. It is just a throwaway paragraph included in statutory guidance that schools have to follow. So we're quite undeterred because we're here to try and do the best job for our members and make sure that we are fighting for their rights. So we took these results to have discussions with the ICO, with the Information Commissioner's Office, who we had engaged with primarily, but they were keen for us to provide more details. So we were able to gather a lot of evidence about this, including the snapshot survey that we'd used. And so the ICO did share our concerns about this issue, and for them there are two particular points that they are worried about. So asking candidates for social media logins, that is a big no in the eyes of the ICO, because you are asking for password protected information, even though there's no discernible reason why that would be the case. And also this engagement of third parties, because you are handing your responsibility over, even though schools and colleges are the data protection handler, they are discharging that responsibility to someone else, but then not having anything to guide the process. So that's very concerning for them as well. So in the first instance, they have updated some existing guidance that they have on their website about pre-employment vetting of candidates, and making it clear that the request for social media logins is not acceptable and should not be part of pre-employment vetting. And they're also planning further guidance. In the first instance, they are hoping to have an authored piece in Schools Week, which they've deliberately chosen because of the readership of schools and colleges and teachers and leaders, rather than on their own website, which might be harder to access. So they're trying to do something quite publicly available. And we're really hoping this comes off soon, because then we can use it to draw our members' attention to let them know that other organisations, authoritative bodies, and the ICO does actually have legislative powers. So it's a really good authority to have someone else that's concerned about this issue. And one of the areas that came up that was very interesting to us in our discussions with the ICO is the issue of consent. So the ICO have clear advice on consent, and they are very clear that asking for permission from a candidate for a post or an existing employee would not be seen as true consent under data protection law necessarily, because if you are applying for a job, or if you are already in your job, there's an imbalance of power, because you don't know what the consequence of refusing to hand over those social media logins or information would be. So you could understandably be concerned that you might not get shortlisted for the post, or your job might be at risk. So it's not seen as freely given consent. And so there's a lot of information online about consent being a kind of catch-all for this process. And there's some poorly written advice already on Schools Week about the fact that if schools have consent, they're fine, they're covered, you've asked for consent, so it's all legal. It's not. There's a risk that schools are taking by requesting passwords for social media logins because of that imbalance of power, it could be contested about whether it is true consent or not. So just to kind of wrap up, so what can we do collectively? So while we're waiting on the ICO to issue authoritative advice, which will hopefully come in the guise of a schools leak article first, and then in the longer term, they are looking at some dedicated guidance on this, but it might be a little bit ahead because they're going through some internal changes. But we've got our NASUWT framework that we can draw on. That's really helpful. It sets out some principles of good practice, excuse me, and the framework discourages employers from engaging in intrusive practice. And this is something we really need to kind of push. So in particular, asking for social media logins is completely intrusive and unnecessary, and it's hard to justify. And it's our job to raise awareness of the risks of doing so, particularly around the misinterpretation of consent. So as I've already said, having consent in this way would not necessarily cover a school in terms of its legalities under data protection law. And our activists can work with settings to check the recruitment policies for inclusion of online searches and be sure that if schools are determined to include it and they see it as an important part of their recruitment practices, then they need to have that guiding framework or structure. They cannot just put it in without some way of governing what information is being collected, how it's being used, who's collecting it, even things like how long it's stored for. There are some really helpful points in the framework that would help schools to make sure that they are meeting their ethical, moral and legal duties if they are determined to undertake this practice. So here is where the framework is published. And that's everything in terms of this presentation. So I think looks like there's some chat that I'm happy to have a look at.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of questions, Sarah. I'll take one from the chat from Sybil, I think. Actually, there's quite a few. So there's one from Sybil. Are there stipulations on when an organisation can stop their online searches, i.e., after they have been employed, can they still legally continue to look at our online presence?
So this is only about, so keeping children safe in education only governs, the way it's set out is only about shortlisted candidates. So I don't know how a school would say they are doing it under safeguarding, because there is nothing in the statutory safeguarding guidance to do that. I presume if they are going to do that, and maybe we need to check this with our colleagues in legal, they would have to have something in their policy to say why they're doing it. But I do know schools do it. Whether they should or shouldn't is a different matter. But if schools are saying it's under the guise of keeping children safe in education, that's not what the guidance states. It says shortlisted candidates, and it is specifically for recruitment. So that wouldn't hold up.
And if you do have problems, Sybil, if you are concerned about that, I would get in touch with your caseworker, or if you are a caseworker, maybe your regional or national centre, and just get that checked by somebody there. John's asked, and I think you mentioned this in one of the sessions at the Equalities weekend, does this have an equivalence in Northern Ireland? And I seem to think you said that employers are doing it over there as well.
So in Northern Ireland, we were asked by the education department whether they thought this would, through our Northern Ireland team, whether the risks of this, and we set out very clearly the risks of putting this into safeguarding guidance. And from what I understand, it was not put into any statutory guidance, based on the concerns we raised about how challenging it is for settings to do this and still meet their obligations under other legislation. That doesn't mean to say that schools aren't doing it, but again, I don't know what duty they would say they are fulfilling by doing it, because as far as I'm aware, there's nothing in any guidance in Northern Ireland to say that these practices are a good idea and should be done.
Okay, thank you. One more on the chat and then we'll go to the Q&A. Could a member ask the prospective employer for a list of specific questions in written format, but refuse to provide them with access codes to their social media account?
In terms of the questions, as in what they'll be looking for.
That's what I'm thinking. Tony, could you just provide a little bit more info for us, do you think? It's in the chat, Sarah. It's come to just us.
Oh, okay. Could a member ask? I mean, I don't see why a member couldn't ask the prospective employer for a list of specific questions. But again, this is where we struggle with that imbalance of power, because is a prospective employer going to want to rock the boat? And this is where we have that kind of push-pull, and really we need to be putting the downward pressure on employers not to do this, because it is very hard to know what a member would want to do and feel compelled to do in terms of handing over details if they feel that their ability to get that job will be at risk. So that's why, from a union perspective, it's about making sure that the practice doesn't happen in the first place. That's the best thing that we can do.
Brilliant. And I think as well, Tony said that's fine. And I think as well, as caseworkers, sometimes we might feel that we want a member to act in a certain way. But as caseworkers, we give them their choices, don't we? Their options. And we say, whichever one you feel is the best for you at this time, we will support you as best we can. And I know as a past caseworker, the flexible working request that I really wanted a member to take further, and for whatever reason, understandably, they didn't. So yeah, we're always guided by our members as caseworkers anyway, aren't we? Right, the ones in the Q&A, Sarah. So Liam has asked, some of our members have set up this interesting one, social media for their departments. They've now been asked for the usernames and passwords for these, which on the face of it is okay. But several, when they set them up, did so and linked them to their own accounts. So this would then, they'd have to pass on their personal details. And his initial thought is close them down, but just wanted to check that this is the right way forward.
I mean, obviously it depends how those people feel about passing on their personal details, but that is, you know, I don't know what the reason for that would be. I'm also not sure how come members would be setting up social media for their departments. I don't think that would be in their terms and conditions of their contract. There is a complicated issue in terms of social media and having to link it to a personal profile. But I wonder if they could be changed to be linked to a school profile, which then has no access to anybody's personal details, because I would imagine those members might not feel comfortable with that. And if they're not, then there's no reason that they should be handing over those details.
I would agree with you. Anything to do with social media for an employer, you take it away from your personal account. You keep those two very separate. Yeah. And Susan has asked, should candidates be given information before any interview if the employer has found something during an online search that they want to raise to enable them to be prepared for the interview?
So that's not what Keeping Children Safe in Education states. It says that the information can be explored with the candidate at interview. I mean, what you're describing sounds like good practice to me, but it doesn't mean that it would happen. So I don't know what grounds we would be able to say that should be done. I mean, it's an example of best practice, but it isn't what Keeping Children Safe in Education states. It states that it has to be, it can be explored with the candidate at interview. So again, that would be where activists and caseworkers could work with schools to have certain elements to their policies guiding this, but whether a school would be willing to do that, I don't know. And legally, under Keeping Children Safe in Education, they don't have to.
Thank you. And Liam's come back and said we're advised not to do, but some like to show off. But right, he said we'll get them to check so it can be changed over. I think that's very good advice.
Yeah, that seems sensible. Yes, for all sorts of reasons, in which we've already picked up, I think, in this presentation.
And the last one, Sarah, is from Deborah, and she says, would a candidate without much social media presence be disadvantaged if these checks are made in selection?
Well, we would say no. And we have specifically got a section in our framework that says that someone having a limited online presence should not be seen as a reason not to progress their application. So again, this is where we need to make sure that if schools are carrying out these practices, they are clearly stating how they are assessing that information, because you're completely right. The fact that someone has chosen not to have a social media presence does not mean, and there is no possible way you could suggest that they are a safeguarding risk because they haven't decided to engage in those activities.
And have you found in our research that it's more prevalent in, say, academies, in trusts, multi-academy trusts? I'm presuming not so much in authority schools, but again, I could be wrong about that.
So when I collated quite a lot of information for the ICO to go back and present our case to them, I trawled through a lot of schools' safer recruitment policies, and it was pretty much an even spread. There was no, so you can find a lot of recruitment policies online just by searching for them. And I found, I'd say, an even amount of local authority maintained schools and those and academies that are sitting in a trust, and then the trust governs all of the schools in terms of the same way. So it's pretty widespread, I would say.
And just the last one, which sort of leads on from that, really. Do the schools have their own online search policies? Can the candidate ask for more details of it when shortlisted? And hopefully my dog didn't get in the way there with her barking.
No, I didn't hear it. So Keeping Children Safe in Education states that schools should be upfront with what they, with the searches that candidates will be exposed to. I don't see why a candidate wouldn't be able to ask for more details of it when shortlisted. And also the other thing that candidates can do is go onto the school website, and quite often you can find all of the policies. But this is only purely anecdotal. The policies that I have seen wouldn't give much detail at all on what the online search framework or governance was. But again, it's going to come back to that imbalance of power, isn't it? Would you really want to be rocking the boat if you need that job, want that job? It's really, really problematic.
Right. Well, I think that's it. Thank you. I was making notes. The whole issue of consent is really interesting. As you say, when you've got this sort of higher power and you need a job to pay the bills, it is amazing what things you will agree to in order to try and get employment. So yeah, so we just have to wait for the advice then.
Yes, yeah, that's our kind of next step in it. And I think once we've got that authoritative advice from the ICO, we may well use it as an opportunity to go back to the DfE and just ask again for some kind of addition. But the closed door is because it's always about safeguarding. So that's the problem. But we've got to keep making those representations that safeguarding and protecting the privacy of teachers can coexist, because it can, but it's getting other people to take that view. So we'll keep fighting on.
And Deborah's just popped in the chat, concerns for diversity candidates.
Completely.
Absolutely, Deborah. I mean, all of the protected characteristics, as Sarah said, it is very difficult. I mean, we know particularly with certain groups, they don't want to reveal things for perfectly good reasons, because we know there is discrimination out there. And so sharing these details all of a sudden, as Sarah said, that they just have this information about your life just
Yeah.
opened up before them, and they're making all these assumptions before they've even called you to interview, or they might decide not to call you
Mm.
to interview just because as an assumption they've made. So it is a very worrying issue, and one that we are aware of, and I know Sarah and the team are really hot on, and we will share progress with you as things go.
Definitely. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you ever so much to all those who've attended today. Thanks for your time. Hopefully I'll see you again at some event in the future. I think possibly the next one might be annual conference. And thank you ever so much, Sarah, for your time. That was an excellent, excellent webinar.
No, you're welcome. Thanks everyone for attending.
Have a lovely weekend, everybody, when it finally comes.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.